morning, editing heathens. That's right, it's morning. Today, I'm gonna be showing you how to break down any montage like this so that you can bring those effects into your own workflow. And this transition in particular, I'm gonna call it this film reel transition, is really slick, really cool. So I'm gonna talk about how you would build something like this up and recreate it in your own videos or montages. Quick disclaimer, the goal of this is not to copy Sayo. The goal is to learn how to build something like this out for yourself. So if your takeaway at the end of this is now I can recreate and steal his montage, I think you are missing the point. So grab a cup of water, a cup of coffee, a sandwich, I don't know, chicken nuggets, and let's go ahead and hop into it. Now disclaimer, I actually recorded this whole video. I realized that OBS was not on. So this is take two. All right, and so today what we're gonna be looking at is this section right in here. So starting with this wall peak into almost this film reel like transition into the rest of the video. And it's basically this like a 2-second segment. And I'm gonna go ahead and just remove the outer section. We'll go ahead and take a closer look at what's happening in here. And what I'm gonna do is I have two weapon inspects that would be used for thumbnails. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take clip A and transition to clip B using this workflow. Okay, so if I'm trying to understand any effect within DaVinci Resolve, whatever editing program that you use, it's good to do a couple little scrub throughs. And let me actually mute this real quick. It's good to do a couple of scrub throughs to get an idea of what's happening here. So we've got a few things going on. I would say we have 3 sections, if you will. We have our starting clip. We'll call that section 1. We have our transition film reel with this text on it. We'll call that section 2. And our lead out into the next clip, and we'll call this section 3. I'm gonna go ahead and start to make a note. We've got our, we'll call it our opener section. We've got the film reel transition, and then we have our closer. Now, the rate at which you understand something like this is obviously going to depend on your experience level when it comes to editing and creating effects. I'm by no means an expert, but I have edited a few videos at this point. So there's a couple things that I can spot out already that I know I'm going to have to do. The first one, and one of the most obvious things, is that if we take a look at the frame in the video, we can see that we have, before we begin our transition, we have a slight zoom in. We are zooming in on the screen. I'm gonna go ahead and make a note of that. So we have a zoom in, we'll get there. One of the other things that I was able to spot out quickly is that we have some chromatic aberration. If you look at the edges of any of these individual elements, and the video is a little bit lower quality, so it might be hard to pick out, but you'll see a blue or greenish tint and a red, orangish tint on either side. This is called chromatic aberration, I'm sure, or prisming, or I'm sure there's other terms for it. But essentially what's happening is we split the RGB, the red, green, and blue channels in either the X, Y, or I guess you could do Z direction ever so slightly. So it looks like we've got a little shift in these RGB channels. We've got some chromatic aberration, and I'm gonna go ahead and say, and I don't know if this was actually used or if this is just some motion blur on the zoom in. If you look at the sharpness of that image, you can see right in here, we get a little bit of some blur. And it looks like it's some kind of directional blur, but I'm gonna say it's a zoom blur because the image in the middle stays relatively clear. I'm gonna say we've got some zoom blur going on there. I think that's it for our opener. And now moving into that next section, you can see I'm toggling back and forth between the 2 frames here using my arrow keys. And there is a very sudden and abrupt change in the look of what's going on here. And I think this is some kind of camera shake. And in particular, I think this is a Twitch shake. Now I'm gonna go ahead and link a video somewhere up top here or in the description to PeeJ's shake video, because he's got a whole video on different shakes and how you go ahead and make them and apply them. But essentially what you do is you start with a very high change in the X, Y, position or the rotation or one of these properties, and then very quickly ease out of that property. And what that does is it creates a lot of shake, and they're very useful for either transitions or creating moments of impact or things like that. And so when I see something like this with an abrupt change in our zoom and it's very blurry, that's what I think is happening there. So I think we start with Twitch shake going into our film reel section. Now this might be something that might be a little bit trickier to pick up on if you're newer to editing, but that is okay. So now as we move into the film reel, before we even try to break down how we get this like stretched out video look, something else that I'm catching is that we get blurry. So again, the video itself is a bit low on the bit rate, but in particular, if you look at the lettering on this, we are pretty blurry. So I think there is some kind of either blur, fade, I don't know, some kind of blur transition in. And then we've got, I'd say, 3 elements going on here. We've got a space background that's going on here. We've got space background, and then we've got our text, and then the actual film reel video thing. I think what we'll do is we'll tackle each of these individually when we get to them. Okay, let me keep scrubbing through. I think that's the bulk of it. Yeah, especially if you look at the background and the stars when it comes to that blur, and you can still catch that chromatic aberration. And there might even be, and this might just be a master grade thing, if you look at the highlights of this and the lighter parts, you can see that it's almost got some kind of halation effect or a soft glow to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and make note of that, but I think we've got some kind of halation on the overall color grade of this video. And so when I'm talking about things like the color grade and the overall look, that's something that's gonna be applied to the whole video, and not necessarily we need to break down in the edit itself. But I'm gonna go ahead and just make a note of kind of halation or soft glow. And then moving into our last section here, this is such a sweet transition. This is so dope. Is there a better term for this? I'm gonna call this our jigsaw transition, because the different pieces are kind of moving into frame, which is so sweet. And then to get to the actual clip itself, I think we have a similar kind of transition as we did going from the film reel, because we get real blurry. And as we scrub forward, you can see that our camera begins to shake. So I think this might be a more subtle shake. So I do think we have some kind of shake transition. We also have our blur, and then that goes into this clip. So like I said, just within those 2 seconds, we have quite the list of things that are going on, which will always make you appreciate somebody's work just a little bit more. Because on the surface, you might say, wow, that looks so smooth and looks so good. And you might not pick up on all the little subtleties that they do to make it look that good. All right, so now that we've provided a little bit of structure to what we've got going on, we can approach how to make something like this. We're gonna do our best. We are gonna do our best. So let's start at the beginning. I'm gonna ignore our soft glow and our color grade for now. Let's start with the opener, and let's go ahead. So the 2 clips that I'm gonna be working with and transitioning back and forth from are these 2 weapon inspects. I do some thumbnails on the side for some people, so I had these lying around. We're gonna start with video A. We're gonna go to video B. And our transition is gonna live somewhere here in the middle. We're working with our opening clip, and we've got essentially 3 things that we're doing. We've got our zoom in, chromatic aberration, and zoom blur. Now, the question is, okay, how do we begin to apply that to our clip? Your 2 choices are going to be to either work with effects on the edit page or to use Fusion. I am gonna recommend using Fusion. You can definitely attempt to do all of your stuff on the edit page. And if that's what works for you and it makes sense for you and you can translate things one-to-one, go crazy. There's no need for you to go into Fusion if you can do things comfortably on the edit page. I'm gonna recommend you use Fusion though, because I think the faster you get into Fusion and the more comfortable you get using it early on, the more dynamic you can get with your videos and the better you can make things look, work, and feel. That's gonna be my recommendation, and that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use the Fusion page. Now, there's gonna be a couple ways that we can even do this in Fusion. We could just hop into the clip itself and start working with our nodes on the raw footage here. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. We could also right click on this and make it a new Fusion clip. And the nice thing about doing that is a Fusion clip is that it resets our frame to 0. And we actually are working with different frame rates on this video timeline. So you'll see that the our frame rates now match the timeline as well. So that's a good choice. The other choice, and the one that I'm going to use, and I'm not saying this is always the best choice, is I'm going to apply this using an adjustment clip. I'm going to go ahead and drag an adjustment clip down here. Let's go ahead and change the color of this so that we can remember what we're working with. So the nice thing about an adjustment clip is that, say we set up an effect here that we like, we can, after we're done setting up our effect, we can go and save it to our power bins so that we can use it for later, or even just drag and drop it in the media pool. And we can slide this around, you know, to be used or to duplicate it on our timeline. The downside, and if I have any DaVinci people in here, go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but the downside to doing something like this is that your playback might begin to be a bit smoother. Because an adjustment clip, when you hop in, has to pull information from your timeline. So what it's doing is it's feeding in information from your timeline with this media in clip. And because of that, if you've got a lot of stuff happening below your adjustment clip, playback might be a little funky, but I just think it's going to be easier for me to demonstrate how to do some of these things. The moral of the story is use your best judgment. Okay, so we're going to hop into Fusion. And we're just going to start from the beginning. So the first thing we've got is some kind of zoom in. In order for us to apply zoom, the node we're going to use is a transform node, which is it's a fundamental, man. Shout out. Oh, not texture transform. Just want transform. Shout out a good old transform node. I'm holding shift to insert it into our pipeline. I'm going to go to the beginning of our footage. And all I'm going to do, then we keyframe our zoom property. Keyframe indicates change. And I'm going to go to the end of an adjustment clip, and I'm going to zoom it in. How much you want to zoom it in is up to you. Let's do a good old 1.25. Seems good to me. And I have our spline window open over here. I have our keyframe selected, and I'm going to refit them at our window. Hit Control A to select the 2 points, and then you can hit F to flatten them. And in this case, S is smooth. We'll do the same. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to ease. I'm going to go to out cubic. And this will give us a ease out of our property. You can always adjust this to make it a little bit sharper. And then I'm going to turn on motion blur. And I think this is actually what is used. And there's not actually a zoom blur. Because if I look at our clip as it zooms in, at the beginning, you can see we've got a lot of motion. So we see our motion blur. I'm actually going to increase our shutter angle just a smidge and the quality that looks a little bit more motiony. If I go back to the timeline and compare it to the original footage, I think that's what's actually happening. In particular, watch this map up top here. When we start to zoom in, you can see we got a lot of directional blur happening here. And then as it begins to slow down and stop on the zoom in point, the blur goes away. So I don't know if we actually have a zoom blur happening. I think this was actually just motion blur. Perfect, 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 perfect. Cool. Step one, we got our zoom in. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to add a little chromatic aberration. If you were to go to your tool menu and type in chromatic aberration, you're not going to find it. And that's because it's not saved as a macro in DaVinci. It's saved as an effect. I don't know if it's an open effect or not, but it's going to be in your templates folder. So I'm up top here, over here in the effects menu, templates, and I'm going to search chromatic. Now we can find our chromatic aberration. Drag and drop that guy down into our pipeline. And if I were to zoom in on, say, the hand here, and I increase our aberration amount, we can see that red and blue layers. Perfect. There we go. The opener is done. It's pretty quick, but that's in essence all that was. Just a little whoop. Okay, so we just got a little zoom in before we hit the clip. Okay, and so the next thing that we got going on here is the shake, and I think it's a twitch shake. And I'm going to preface this with saying that if you are new to Fusion and you're new to doing something like this, this might seem like a lot. So again, I'm going to leave that link in the video, or I'm going to leave a link to his video. Go check it out if you want a more detailed description and a slower breakdown of how to do something like this. I am going to go through it pretty quick. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to our effects. We're going to drag another adjustment clip down. I think this is a 1 second adjustment clip. Yep, it's 1 second. I'm going to right click on this and we're going to give this a new color. Let's make it orange. Orange seems like a good one. And I'm going to hop into the Fusion page for this adjustment clip. Now what PeeJ will tell you, or anybody else who's done a shake tutorial, is that there's a lot of different ways to do something like this. And there's not a right way. There's just whatever way you want to get the look that you're going for. So I'm going to bring in a transform node, and you could either work with either of them. I'm going to use the one with XF. What we're going to do, excuse me, is we're going to do some modifying. We're going to use the modifiers. And this is where, if you're not comfortable with Fusion, this might seem like a lot, but it's pretty, well, I don't know if it's that straightforward, but what we're going to do is I'm going to go over to the center property over here, right click on it, modify width, and then shake. And what we've done is we've modified our center property and we've added some random motion to our center property using the shake modifier. You can see it's unlocked the modifier tab up top here. That'll bring you to the modifier settings that you have applied to this node. We'll go back to the tools tab real quick. Now immediately it looks funky. Like you're like, oh, this does not, I don't think this is looking the way I want it to look. There's a couple things that we can do to help fix this. One is we're going to go to the edges setting. We're going to change this from canvas to mirror, and that'll help fill in some of those gaps and make it look like it's kind of wrapping around the image. You could use, I think, not duplicate. You could use wrap as well, but I don't know. I like mirror. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to the settings. We're going to turn on motion blur. This will help kind of blend in those edges together and make it feel a bit more seamless. And again, you can change this to look and be as blurry as you'd like. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the controls now. Now we actually have to work with our shake modifier because in its current state, I mean, we do have some shaking going on, but at the end of that shake, we don't end up back in the middle. And it's not, I don't know, it's kind of slow, right? We want this thing to really pop, like it hits and then it's done. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over to the modifiers tab, and we've got two properties that we're gonna work with today, the minimum and maximum property. The way the shake modifier works is that it will generate random values based off of the minimum and maximum that you give it for whatever property that you're working on. So we could do this with the angle or the zoom or whatever, but we're working with the center property. Now the center property is a little bit funky because the X and Y values are combined in terms of displacement. If you wanted to separate your X and Y values, you could work with the transform node and that will have those split. But the nice thing about working with just the center property that has them combined is that we're just talking about an overall change in direction. I know it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but just, you know, bear with me. Now, the thing to know about that is that when we start messing around with our center property, I'm going to go to our transform node. Our center property sits at 0.5, 0.5. So when we look at this modifier, our minimum is 0 and our maximum is 1. So if I were to bring that to 0.5, 0.5, you can see there's no motion because we're sitting now on that center value. But if I were to change this to like negative 0.5 and 1.5, now we've got a lot of motion. Now what PeeJ does and what I would recommend doing, but I'm not for this example because I want to get through setting up this effect, is he is going to set up these using Anim curves. Now Anim curves are really nice because they work based off of a normalized length of time. It doesn't work based off of keyframes. So you can think of it as like, instead of me keyframing things like in 5-frame increments, 10-frame increments, you can say, I want this to work over 1 second. But I think it's gonna be a little bit too much for this video. So all I'm going to do is I'm gonna start at the beginning. I'm gonna keyframe our minimum, keyframe our maximum, and I'm gonna go to the end and I'm gonna change these to 0. Or to 0.5, excuse me, 0.5. And the reason I started with negative 0.5 and 1.5 is it's plus and minus 1 from our center values, right? So now if I were to scrub through this, our shake is gonna decrease until we hit the end of it. Let's go ahead and smooth this out. And I want this to be pretty dang sharp. I'm gonna hit Control A, I'm gonna hit F to flatten it. And let's deselect the maximum for just a second. And I'm gonna grab our handles, and I want this to be, again, pretty sharp. When drag these guys out, do the same thing, but for the maximum, Control A, and I want it to be down like this. I want this to be pretty stinking sharp. Here we go, bang. Shift in motion, and we're back to normal. If you don't like the way this looks as is, you can just reseat it, and this will change kind of, you know, how it starts with that perturbed motion. So if you like something like that, great. Ooh, this is looking kind of sharp. Ooh, yeah, I like that. Looking pretty slick. Good old 30-47-0. Okay, and so now if I were to play this, bang. Give it a shake. Let's go back to our list. We have now done our opener section. We've done our shake. The next thing is our blur fade, blur transition in. Let's go back to the original. That's right. We've got a good amount of blur going on here. 15 frames, so about half a second. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag in an adjustment clip again. I'm separating things for the purpose of this video. You don't have to have them separated. You could do things on the same adjustment clip or again on the video file itself. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 frames over. Let's go ahead and make our blur color. Sure, why not? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hop into the Fusion page for this adjustment clip. Now you can go ahead and use whatever blur that you would like. I think most people are gonna be familiar with and use the good old Gaussian blur. I'm gonna go ahead and use that one. I don't think it's the best, but you know, it's the most straightforward. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna do the exact same thing that we did with our shake. And some of the other properties is that we're just gonna start at a value, and then at the end of the composition, bring it to 0. That's it. So I think I want this to be up just a little bit more. I don't know. I don't think I want to smooth this because I think it's a gradual ease off of the blur. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I mean, you can always play with your spline if it's not looking how you'd like it to look, but I think that looks pretty good. Boom, done. Okay, now comes the rest of the video, the beast of the effect. And that is this middle section in here. We've got a few things going on here, and the easiest one to tackle first is to get some kind of space background or whatever background you want to use. I have some stock media that we can pull from, so I think I actually have some space. I do. I have some space backgrounds that we can use, so let's do this. One's kind of cool. Yeah, it's fun. I'm gonna go ahead and bring this up a layer, and I'm gonna drag our base background underneath. Okay, so the next thing, I'm not gonna worry about the text yet. The next thing that we've got going on here is this like stretch out. I keep calling it a film reel kind of look. And as I'm scrubbing through this, what I'm doing is I'm taking note of a couple things. So one, obviously the clip itself pulls out, right? So we're zooming out, and then it's moving left to right. So keep an eye on that knife. You can see it's moving to the right, and as it moves to the right, there's not new footage that's coming over here on the left. It looks like it's wrapping around, which is what we already know how to do using a transform node. We know about that edge setting. So I in my head, I'm thinking we're probably gonna have to use a transform node here. And then it also looks like, I mean, we have our chromatic aberration again, right? We're picking that up, the highlighted edges. It looks like we've got some kind of warping, either a lens warp or a fisheye warp or something, but you'll notice that the edges are kind of curling up and away. So I'm gonna say for our film reel thing, we've got a zoom out, we have the actual wrap effect, and then we also have some kind of lens distortion. I would say these are like the primary things we've got going on. By breaking things down in increments like this, it'll hopefully help us take this apart. So how long does this last? So it's about a second, and then 8 frames. I'm gonna make our cut. Now I'm gonna do is I am going to make this a new Fusion clip. Just because, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to put this thing in the correct frame rate. It's gonna start us on frame 0, and it's just gonna be a little bit easier to deal with. Maybe, I mean, you don't have to, but I just think it's gonna be easier to do this. So I'm gonna make this a new Fusion clip, and let's go ahead. We don't need you anymore. And I'm gonna go ahead and open this in the Fusion page. I guess side note, I have my open in Fusion page mapped to X. So I forgot that's what I'm clicking to get into the Fusion page when I want to get into something. I'll select the clip and then I hit X and then it opens it in Fusion. Okay, so in general, whenever I start to do something in Fusion, normally what my first step is I will add a background node, and I actually have this saved as this alpha background macro. I'll add a background node, I'll bring that transparency down, and then I'll use that as like the master background. It's not always necessary, but what I end up finding happens a lot of times when I'm working with like text animation or video animations, or like when I'm doing effects, is that you can get some like really weird sizing problems. And so by just having a background as like the ultimate background, it tends to alleviate a lot of those problems. So let's start with the first thing. And the first thing we got to do is we just got to have this thing pull out. Let's try taking this step by step. So how will we zoom out? Let's go ahead and add a transform node. We're going to go back and reference our clip. This isn't an exact science, but it's about 1/3 of its original size. So I'm going to go to our transform node, keyframe the size at the beginning, and I'm going to go to the end, and I'm going to decrease the size to, let's do, I don't know, 0.4. 0.4 is an easier number than 1/3. And then I'm going to flatten this out. We'll do rough like that. Yeah, gradually decreases in size. Perfect. Okay, step 1 complete. The next thing that we need to do is we need to get it to wrap. And I'm cheating a little bit because we did actually solve this on stream. I know the direction that I want to go in. I'm going to try to approach this like somebody who's discovering this effect for the first time. So what you would probably do is, and to get it to wrap, what you might think is, okay, we have 2 options. You could use the transform node and use the edge property. The problem with doing that is that it wraps on all sides. So we want it to just wrap left and right. But what we're getting is top and bottom as well, which is not exactly what we want. Something else that you might think about doing, and this works as well, is you could say, well, why not just put them side by side? So let's make a duplicate. Let's copy and paste our media in node. Let's make some duplicates of this node. Let me go ahead and preview this. And then we can just shift our duplicates to the left and to the right. And so if I were to reconnect this back to our transform node and excuse me, let me take off the edge setting, put it to canvas. It works. The problem with doing something like this though is I think for one-time use, it would work just fine. But what'll happen is if you continue to zoom out, at a certain point, the effect breaks and it no longer works. And I'm always a fan of setting things up so that you can use it whenever, wherever, and that it's not situationally dependent on something. If you want to do something quick and dirty, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to undo all of that. I'm going to undo our duplicates. So how do we cut off these top and bottom values? I would say our 2 choices are to find a different node to work with. You know, we could try to make the duplicate node work, or we could search through our node library and try to find something that was maybe built specifically for this. Option 2 is we cut these off with a mask or a matte. And this is going to be the way that I go about doing it. But the big issue with doing something like this is that our size changes over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something sneaky that is going to mask out these top and bottom layers, and I'm going to link it to the zoom of our video. And I think it's going to make a little bit more sense once we actually do it. So how do we mask this out? Well, I'm going to go ahead and add in a matte, and there's probably going to be a gazillion ways to do your mask or matte properly. This is the way I figured out how to do it. Go ahead and add a matte control. And what I'm going to do is with our matte control, I'm going to add in a rectangle node. A rectangle node. Boom. Here's a rectangle node. And at first it doesn't do anything because our rectangle is connected to the mask input of the matte control. So it's masking our matte control. What we want it to do is we want it to be an input. So I'm going to unconnect this. Holding down the right mouse button, I'm going to hover over the matte control, release, and I want garbage matte. And now we're cooking with fire. But right now we got the opposite effect that we want. So we can go to our rectangle. I mean, you could do this with the garbage matte as well. You can invert the garbage matte. But I'm gonna go to our rectangle. I'm gonna invert it. And here's where we need to get a little bit conceptual in DaVinci Resolve. And this is, again, an area where I think a little bit of experience is going to go a long way with just setting up some of these things. You might have a clear idea of how to go about doing it. A lot of the nodes and the properties work on a normalized scale. And you've probably heard me say that word a few times, but essentially, if you forgot your math terms, it works on a scale from 0 to 1. So instead of working on, our frame is 1920. Instead of going from 0 to 1920, we go from 0 to 1. The reason this is useful is because no matter what resolution we're working with, our nodes are going to work the same and we can make it more dynamic. I don't want it to cut off things left and right. I want this thing wrapping all the way around. But what I do want is I want it cutting off these top and bottom videos. What's nice, because these are normalized, our size on our transform node is also a normalized value. Because the size is normalized and the height is normalized, I can link those two values. Stay with me now. This is a little tricky thing that you can do in Fusion, but I can select my transform node. I'm gonna pin it on our inspector property. So that way, when I click on the rectangle node, let me hide our spline window, ban this. We have both the nodes selected, right? So I pinned the transform node. I'm going to go to our height property on the rectangle node, and you can either right click, go to expression, or what I'm gonna do is I'm just type equal in here. Now we have a field that we can type an expression into. What I wanna do is I want the height to equal the size property at all times. So what you can do is grab this little plus icon and link it to the size property. Bam, magic. Now watch both the height and the size value. As I scrub across the timeline, you'll see that they are exactly the same. And so what we've done is we have created something that height is going to dynamically change over time with our size property. So no matter what the size is, the height of our rectangle mask is going to be exactly the same. It's a pretty sneaky thing to do in DaVinci, and I have a feeling that whoever created the video might have used some kind of template or preset to make this, but if you wanted to do it by hand, this would be how you would do it. Yeah, this step right here, I think, is the most difficult thing that we're going to do today. So if you're able to follow along, pat yourself on the back. The next thing that we need to do is we need to have it move. We're going left to right, so we need to have this thing move. I'm gonna go back to our Fusion clip. Hey, there's a space background. Go to the Fusion clip, open a Fusion. So let's create that motion. I'm gonna do this on a separate transform node. A wise piece of advice I heard when I was first getting to Fusion is to separate all of your motions onto different transform nodes. Because that way, if you change, like if you need to go back and fine tune something, you don't have to mess with the other node. So I'm gonna add another transform node. Go ahead, I think I wanna do it after our mat control. I'm gonna keyframe our center property. I'm gonna go to the end, and I'm going to have this thing move. I'm gonna go ahead and change our edges to, I think, wrap. Yeah, I want it wrap. And we can make this as big as we need to be. So maybe let's do like negative 3.5. We want that motion blur, so I'm gonna turn on motion blur here. Bang. And if I remember correctly, it eases into that wrap motion, or eases out. I think it eases out is the right. I'm gonna go to our keyframes here, hit F, then want this thing to kind of accelerate in. This is looking how we want it to look. The other way you could do this, if you didn't want to do the transform node, is you could do it at the merge as well. But I feel like the merge node can get funky very quickly. So I think this is looking how we want it to look. Yeah, I think that's looking good. I'm happy with how that's turning out. W's in the chat. Okay, so the next thing, we've got our wrap. Got our zoom out, and the last thing we need to do is add that distortion. And I think there's actually a built-in lens distort. No. And I think I actually want this one, the one without the parentheses. Yeah, the one without the parentheses, and I want it to go in the other direction. Go a nice 0.3. Yeah, that's looking good. Yeah, I think this is what we want. If we wanted to, we could keyframe the distortion. I probably should do that. Let me keyframe at the beginning and then go to the end, keyframe it, and we'll start at 0. So that way we ease into it. Yeah, I think that's the right call. We kind of ease into that distortion. Let's mess with our curve just a little bit. I think we want to get there a bit sooner. So I'm going to mess with our spline just a bit. Yeah. Cool. Let's do a quick side-by-side compare. The funkiness that we have going on here in the beginning is from the Twitch shake. It's not from our fusion clip. I'm okay with that. That's looking pretty good. You know what else is kind of happening here that I'm noticing is if you look at the background clip, I think there's some kind of glow being applied to it. Like look particularly in these highlighted areas. I think there's some kind of glow that goes on. Yeah, there's some noticeable bloom. Let's go ahead and introduce that as well. Open that in the fusion page, and let's go ahead and add a soft glow. We can make this look however we'd like. Yeah, and now we have a little bit of bloom. And you could, this is another PeeJ tip, you could add another glow to this, or you could start layering your glows to get something that you're really happy with. So I've got a normal glow and then a soft glow. Perfect. Yeah, that's looking a lot better. Okay, the next thing that we're gonna need to do is the old text effect. We've got some text that's being written on. It kind of expands outward from the middle here. So I'm gonna add a new fusion composition. We'll make this the same length as our clip. Go ahead and hop into this fusion composition. Like I said, I always like to start with a background node. I have a background preset saved that is transparent. And we're gonna add a text node. Bang. Okay, so now we need to set up our text, and we do a, he says, yeah. Let's pick a better font. Ooh, this is kind of fun. Hemi Head. That was my nickname in high school. We don't start with the full text on screen immediately, right? So what that means is we've either animated, or they've either animated their write on property, or they've added a follower modifier. And the center of it is staying in place, but it's expanding outwards. And I don't think it's actually moving left and right. I think we're just adding more letters on. I think that the way they did this, and I don't know if they edited this in DaVinci or if it was Adobe or whatever, but the way we're gonna do it in DaVinci is we're gonna use the follower modifier. And essentially the way this works is that the follower modifier will create a delay for your text animations. So instead of, if I were to change the size property, to have the size change over time, what it would do is it would apply the size property change to each individual letter. And let me show you what that means. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click on our text field, and I'm gonna add a follower modifier. Now, if I go to the modifier tab, we now have an option to add a delay to our different letters, and I'm just gonna add a 1 frame delay. Let's see how this works. Delay type, yeah, that's fine. Order, we want this to go, yeah, I think we want this left to right. And then if I go to the text tab, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go forward 1 frame. So we're on frame 1. I'm gonna keyframe the size. And if I go back 1 frame to frame 0, this 0. Now everything's gonna disappear. Now what's gonna happen is we've keyframed our size to go from 0 to 0.8, but because we have this follower modifier and there's a 1 frame delay between each of our letters, every frame we're going to have 1 letter appear. And in doing so, what we've done is we've kind of created our own write on effect, but it operates from the center point of our text field. Kind of a sneaky trick, but that's how we would do that. And let's add, I think we need a bunch of H's or more. Now, the only downside to doing this is because we've changed the size of it using our modifier tab. If I wanted to increase the size even more, it's no longer going to work because we've keyframed the size using the modifier. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to click on our text node, go back to modifier, text, and then I'm going to increase the size here. So let's make this a little bit bigger, even a little bit bigger, something like that. And boom. Now we have that write on effect. If you didn't know how to do this with the follower node, what you could do is back in your tools, you could keyframe the property writing on, and then all you would have to do is you'd have to manually keyframe the position of your text. That would be another way of doing it. But the follower, I think, is how they were able to get that to work. And now if I'm looking at our text, it looks like our text has some glow applied to it as well. And some good old Chromatic Aberration. I think that's got some glow. Go Go in here. You can use, again, whatever glow that you want. I've made this triple glow node a while ago in a video, and I like using it because I tend to get looks that I like. Okay. Now you could turn on motion blur if you wanted, and I actually, you know what? I might do that. Let me turn on motion blur. That looks pretty good. And I haven't added chromatic aberration yet because, again, I think it's being applied to everything. So I'm just going to add an adjustment clip above it that'll add that aberration. And now if we scroll back, we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. I think it's the space background has a separate blur applied to it because I'm looking at its crispness, and I think it's got a little blur. I'm going to add an adjustment clip, and I'm just going to use an open effect for this one because I've used this before. There's a lens blur here. I'm going to drag it onto this adjustment clip, and I scroll here. So now our background's blurred, a little bit out of focus. I think that's it for that middle section, right? Besides the chromatic aberration, I'm going to add another adjustment layer up above this. Let's make this, I don't know, green. Go into Fusion. This is going to slow down our render quite a bit, or our playback speed quite a bit, excuse me. Templates, chromatic aberration. But increase that a good bit. Cool, man. Cool. Looking cool, dude. Same, but different. Same, but different. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is this Jigsaw Transition. And this actually shouldn't be too bad. Let's go ahead and get our second clip. Now, here's the clip that we're going to be transitioning to. Now, in essence, this transition that we're looking at is fast out things that you're moving into frame. It looks like we've got two elements coming to frame, and then we have the transition point where it actually goes to the clip itself, right? So we've got the hands, and then we've got the background kind of sliding up over it. I guess we should sync it to the music, huh? We got a marker for when it begins. When does it end? Bang, right there. Marker. Let's go. Let me just copy and paste this over so we can match our timings. So I need you. Go ahead and trim this up just a bit. I'm gonna drag up our chromatic aberration here, and I'm going to bring our video right here. Okay, let's cut it. So the big thing that we're gonna need to do here is we're gonna need to mask out the gun, right? If depending on what you want to have slide into frame, you're gonna have to separate it somehow. If you have the studio version of DaVinci Resolve, this part's gonna be much easier than if you don't. I have the studio version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Magic Mask. If you don't have the studio version, you can hand roto out whatever you're working with, or if you're in After Effects, you can use the roto tool, or you're probably going to have to use some kind of third-party masking tool. Unfortunately, I have the luxury of having studio, so I'm going to use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a duplicate of our clip that we're transitioning to. Let me disable the second one just for a second. And I'm going to hop into the Fusion page here, and I'm going to insert a Magic Mask. And the nice thing about Magic Mask is that it will do a pretty dang good job of highlighting whatever you got going on, as long as you draw it in pretty well. And I guess if we wanted to, we could remove this, make this better. We got some funkiness going on here, but for the purpose of this video, I don't too much. Let me go ahead and track it. W. So now we have our mask. Got a little funkiness going on here. So if you ever have something like that going on with your Magic Mask, you can go over to the matte tab, play around with the thresholds, and that might help a bit. Oh, I don't know. We might have to live with it. It didn't quite snag it, but that's okay. That's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect for this. Let me go back to the edit page. Now we have our masked out gun. And whenever I'm working with masked objects in DaVinci Resolve, if I've done the masking in DaVinci itself, right? So just like we did in Fusion, sometimes there is caching issues and you will lose that mask if you play with anything. So in order to avoid that, what I always do is I will right click on that and I'm going to render it in place. What this does is it's going to bake that Magic Mask into the video file. And the format that I use is QuickTime. Kodak, we want GoPro Cineform. RGB 16 is what we want. And then render it at the source resolution. Hit render, choose wherever you'd like to save it. And now, no matter where we move this, we have that masked out gun. Okay, and so now that we have it baked in, what we can do is go into the Fusion page, add a transform node, and we just want it to slide on screen. So I got a transform node there, keyframe at the end, go back to the beginning, slide it down, and then let's go ahead and smooth out our splines just a smidge. Now it slides on screen. I'm gonna add motion blur because I'm a sucker. Oh, so now that's sliding on screen. And now we just want to add, whenever you're doing a transition like this, you want to move things up in pieces, right? So we're not moving the entire video clip into frame. He or she has picked a piece of the next clip to transition and move up. So let's go ahead and do the same. I'm gonna re-enable this background clip. I think what I'm gonna do actually is I've shifted stuff up to give me a little more real estate. Is I'm gonna make a freeze frame here because we don't need the background moving just yet. I'm gonna grab a freeze frame of the beginning of what we're transitioning to. So that way the frame is gonna match perfectly when we hit the beginning of this new clip. And hopefully you'll see what I mean when I get there. So let me delete this. I'm taking our footage that we're gonna be transitioning to, making a copy by holding down the Alt key and dragging up. And I'm gonna right click on here, read time controls, freeze frame. Or what you can also do as well is if you go to your inspector tab, there's a speed change tab, you can click this little snowflake and that'll make a freeze frame. Now we have a frozen frame of our clip. You can drag that over. Okay, and so what we could do is, and what I actually do is I normally will compound this just because sometimes when you're working with like retime controls and things, things can get kind of funky in the Fusion page, but you don't have to. We can just hop into the Fusion page. And here you can get creative as you want. So all we're gonna do is just select a region that we want to slide up. And it might have been a good idea to keep the mask or to copy and paste the mask that we created, our magic mask, and and bring it into here so that we're not selecting the gun still. But you know, just select something. You could use the polygon tool, whatever you want to use. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna add a transform node, keyframe, drag it down here, and then we'll just do some slightly different timings so that way it's not like one-to-one. Same thing, so it's like a slightly different timing to this. We do something like that. Doesn't look great. Let's maybe add a little love to it. I'm gonna hop back in the Fusion page, add another rectangle node, and let's move this second one to something like that. You get the point, right? You pick a section of the next clip and you slide it up. All right, and we are so close to being there. So the big thing that's gonna happen here is that when we go to this next clip, right, as we're transitioning into our closing clip, I think you guys can fill in the blanks, right? We've got some blur. It looks like some glow as well because our highlights are pretty bloomed out. And then those just fade off. And then we go into like some kind of twitch shake and the rest of the montage. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and add an adjustment clip here. And how long does this last? We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hop into the Fusion page. We're gonna add, again, choose whatever blur you want. I'm gonna do Gaussian, keyframe, then bring it to 0. And then let's go ahead and add a soft glow. Mess around with some of our sheddings a bit. And then I'm gonna keyframe the gain. You could do the blend as well, but I'm gonna let's just do the blend. Keyframe the blend at the beginning, keyframe at the end, bring it down to 0. Bang. It's like a little exposure blast that transitions it. Is there a shake here? I don't remember. There is a little shake. Okay. So it looks like there is another shake transition going from our jigsaw to the puzzle. So now what we can do is we can copy and paste our shake over here. Boom. Bang. It's looking pretty good. I will say the one thing that I think we did screw up is when we shortened our Fusion composition of our film reel, we messed up our timings. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. I'm gonna go into the Fusion page for that clip. And where's our left to right? So this is the motion that we have going on here. And what I'm gonna do is because we cut off our Fusion clip, you can see our keyframe is hanging off to the end here. Let's hit Control A, and I'm gonna go down to the time stretch tool, select that, and this will proportionately change the length of your keyframes. And I'm just gonna bring this in. Let's see, do we have any other things that happen like that? So yeah, we can do the same with our lens distortion. And this is sometimes when setting up anim curves becomes handy, because if you start changing the length of things, anim curves will change based off length, not frame value. There we go. There we go. Now we get that real whipping effect. Okay, and here is a little before and after. Turn on the music. And this is theirs. It's pretty close. It's pretty close. So the last thing that I would say that we need to do is, got this done. Is it this halation / soft glow. Anytime somebody makes a montage, normally what they'll do is they'll do some kind of color grade to really sell that montagey look and make it pop. So what we can do is something similar. I'm gonna go ahead and add an adjustment clip and bring it over the top of all of our footage. You can grade things on an individual clip level, and it's probably best practice when you're working with IRL footage, but we're in gamer land, so none of the rules matter. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just pick a shot to work with, give us some contrast, breaking this down, brighten that up. And just even with adding some contrast to your footage, will just really help things pop a little bit more. Add another serial node, and you could start to mess with your grade and do really whatever you want from this point. So like, actually that's kind of cool. I like that. That's fun. That looks pretty fun. Sure, why not? Why not? The last thing I'm gonna do is I added another node, and I think halation. I think this might be a studio only feature. If it is, another way you can go about doing this is add a soft glow, or excuse me, a glow. Add a glow, and then with your glow up top here, decrease your spread. We want our threshold down just a little bit. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna change our horizontal and vertical ratio, and keep an eye on this section in here. And you can see that our glow will begin to spread out either horizontally or vertically. So what you can do is you can just add a little horizontal glow, and obviously mess with your gain and your gamma and all this kind of stuff, and that'll give you that like filmic dreamy look. I remember somebody recommending that if you change your composite mode to soft light as well, and then really crank up your gain, yeah, that'll give you some really cool looking stuff. So this is a little before, after, or after, and that gives you kind of like a montagey look, although it's coming in pretty bright, so maybe we reduce maybe we reduce the glow just a little bit. But anyways, I hope that helps you figure out your editing. If you do have some more questions, or if you have suggestions, come by the Discord. We're building out a little community in there of editors and people working on things, trying to grow and improve their skill set. All knowledge levels and skill levels are welcome. I hope you guys found this useful, and I'll catch you in the next one.